here we are in week 2, and what we wanted to pick up on from when we were speaking before, we were talking about, just as a quick recap, we were talking about how looking in the direction of the behaviors, that the behaviors aren't the problem, and looking there and trying to squish the behaviors or use willpower to try and stop the behavior. I mean, we all know how pointless that is, right? We've all tried so many New Year's resolutions to try and quit the thing that we think we want to quit by looking totally at the behaviors, right? If I sit on my hands, I cannot smoke, kind of thing, right? But we talked last time about pointing in a different direction, pointing to how the symptoms are trying to kind of like fill that hole between our ideas of how life should be and how it really is. So do you want to talk to us a bit more about this, what this other direction is, the alternative to trying to manage behaviors? Where is it more helpful to look, like practically, spiritually?
Yeah.
Like if someone is sitting here and they have, like, you know, I drink too much wine and I can't stop drinking wine, and how am I gonna, like, how do I stop if it's not about putting the glass of wine, if it's not about not pouring the glass of wine or not drinking that glass of wine, like what then?
Yeah. And I think the first place, you know, is to understand kind of like how the intellectual mind wants answers, you know, all the time. Like, how do I do it? Yeah, but how? You know, can you give me your 5-step process as to exactly, well, if it's not the behaviors and it's the spiritual way to look, then what's the 5-step process to understanding the spiritual? You know, it's kind of like, so I can just stop this behavior.
Yes.
You know? And it's kind of like, it becomes like the focal point. You know, I am many clients are like that. You know, it's really sort of, and it's really looking or getting away from that. I was going to say, well, let's just have a conversation, you know, and see what happens, you know, rather than having this adamant idea. And I think like the point about this is kind of like that we've become so fixated on the intellectual mind and conditioned, you know, like to get answers and to look for answers and look for solutions, and they have to make sense to us. And the thing about this, what we're talking about here, is that from that place, it doesn't make sense. It won't make sense. It can't make sense, you know, because what we're talking about is beyond words, you know, beyond the intellectual mind. And you know, from someone that's really always coming from that place of trying to make sense of it, trying to understand it, that what happens is that they're just filtering everything that I would be saying to them as if they were a client, or if they were listening to this conversation, trying to work it out. If you're really going, can you get to the point? What is the answer? You know, it's kind of like, you've got your pen and paper ready, you know, like for the magic word, you know, or something like that. It's kind of like, you just can't hear from that place, because like you never allow anything to filter through the intellect, you know, into hearing, you know, from a deeper place. And, you know, what would be pointing to is that place inside all of us that is innately healthy, you know, that place of mental health that is untouchable, that is never been damaged, even in the depths of despair, of addiction and suicidal ideation and mental health struggles, you know, from that extreme to the extreme to the other end of the scale. That's something that might not be as you know, physically destructive, like scrolling on social media or having, you know, eating too many sweets one day, whatever it is, you know, that feels kind of that way. But like, you know, that's the place in people that we're talking to, you know, the place that's beyond the intellectual understanding, the one that can't make sense of it, but just gets to feel better in the moment when they hear that they're okay and that they're not broken. And one last point to make about that is that in this understanding, it's kind of, for me, it was the very first place where someone said, you know, you're okay. Everything's okay. You're not broken. Because every other understanding had confirmed for me that I did have an addiction. There was something wrong with me, and it was based in my past or based on all these things. You know, it's kind of like, and I needed to be broken. Now, I was broken and I needed to be fixed. You know, so it was kind of like, whereas in this understanding, what we're saying is the actual behaviors make perfect sense. You know, actually, the wisdom in action. You know, it's kind of like, because if we've got a busy mind and we're creating, you know, and we're thinking about that gap that I talked about, you know, it's kind of like then acting out and doing something to relieve ourselves of the stress or worry or things that we're creating in our own mind makes complete sense, because all it's doing is it's a way of quieting down the system. It's a way of feeling better about the worry that we're creating for ourselves. So that's kind of like the direction where I want to start looking, you know.
Yeah, so say more about that. So there's a wisdom in the that's a completely different perspective, that our symptoms are evidence of wisdom, not evidence of brokenness.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a revelation for many people, and it kind of makes perfect sense when you think about it, that if you're really worried, you know, you've got this idea of this upgraded self or this you know, better external circumstances, if only I could get this job, you know, and there's so much in that stuff, like if I could get this job, so what would that mean? You know, okay, I strive harder, I learn more, I go to work earlier, I stay longer, I work later at night, it causes disconnection with my family, I miss my children. All those things could be just in that one idea of an external life change. So when I'm thinking that when only I get here, I'll be okay, all this stuff is happening in my external world, you know, and it's kind of like, and I'm having lots of stress, I'm having lots of worry, I'm having lots of fear. So it's kind of like doing something is like the mind quietening itself down, you know, whatever the thing is that I've picked. It might be scrolling social media, it might be overeating, might be obsessively going to the gym, might be taking drugs, substances, and so on and stuff like that. But the mind has a way of regulating itself, you know, of like, and that's kind of like how it shows up, you know, it's kind of like I'm revving it up and then I'm quietening it down.
You
I'm
know
revving
what,
it up.
you really reminded me of a teenager that I spoke with recently, who she was cutting herself. And I was really curious about it because I didn't get it. So I'm like, what? Like, tell me what that's all about. And they said, oh, you know, actually, I looked it up, and it's a kind of like an addiction. Because what happens is I get all this adrenaline and all this adrenaline and all this adrenaline, and it feels really horrible. But when I cut myself, it dissipates it. And all of a sudden, I could see the absolute wisdom in that. Like I'm going to blow a gasket unless I do this, and then wisdom hands you something to do, and if you don't know that, what it looks like is this person's doing something that's dangerous, that's definitely broken, that normal people don't do, that's a dysfunctional behavior. It looks like it's a dysfunctional behavior. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, when you're talking like that, or when she was describing it to me, I could suddenly see, oh no, that right there is wisdom. Yeah. It's, of course, if you're suffering and suffering and suffering, and then you've got something and it's in front of you that will alleviate the pain. Yeah. So if you've got a mind that's really revved up and busy, and then a glass of wine quiets your mind, yeah, then why would you not go for the glass of wine every time? Why would you not go for whatever the thing is that you found that apparently quiets your mind?
Yeah. And if you take it a stage further, like if you think, what are the next options, you know, for someone who doesn't quieten their mind when they're revving it up, you know, it's kind of like it's either a psychotic episode or what we know as a breakdown, you know. It's kind of like that's what's going to happen, you know. It's like if you keep revving it up and you have no way, no outlet, you know. I call it like the steam valve, you know, of the pressure cooker. It's kind of like that's what you're doing, you're letting off the steam. But the thing is that most people don't know that they're creating it in the first place, you know, because they're looking to their external world, trying to modify their circumstances or improve the version of themselves that they are, because it looks like it'll stop the buildup of steam, you know, and you won't have to then let off the steam valve.
Yeah.
You know?
But so tell me, that as you're saying that, sorry, you're making me think like perhaps panic attacks are the same thing, right? Like they're just as our minds get so speedy and revved up, they're like the whistle blowing on the kettle as it's yeah, letting off the steam, right? It's like, it's so you don't blow a gasket, right? It's you know, when you're having a panic attack, it's doing all sorts of things with cortisol and chemicals and all the rest of it, and just kind of so that it can then calm down again.
Yeah.
So that invites the exploration of going upstream from how do I stop the gasket from, how do I stop it keeping, how do I stop the behaviors? So like, how do I, and I know I'm going back to the how do I's because I know that's what's going to be in people's minds, right? But then when we look further upstream, like what you're pointing to there is that we think that it's our environment or our not being the person that we should be, we're not having the environment that we should be, that's what's creating the pressure that means that we need to go and let off steam.
Yeah.
But you're saying that we're saying, what we're pointing to is that's not actually the case. We're going upstream of like the actual, we can see there's a kindness in that now. And when I consider that, even that, I feel more gratitude for symptoms, you know, like I feel more, not kind of gratitude, but like kindness towards them. Like, I get it. I get why I would do that. I get why that person would do that. I get that behavior. Now it makes total sense. So what is it that's, you say it's actually, we don't realize it's us doing it to ourselves. So say a bit more about that. What's creating the need that we then have to go let off steam?
You know, that like when people, before this understanding, you know, it's kind of like we live in this world where it really looks like, I mean, I like the ducks in a row kind of saying, you know, that like when we could only get all our ducks in a row, then we'll be happy. And it looks to most of humanity, they spend their lifetime trying to get their ducks in a row. You know, if only I could get the right me, if only I could get the right outside, I get the right job, the right weight loss, the right relationship, whatever, you know. And there's and the thing is that those things never materialize. They can't, you know, because that's when I was saying earlier about the spiritual void, because just the spiritual void masquerading itself as external circumstances, that we really are conditioned to think that this void that we feel, we don't realize it's spiritual, but we feel that void, and it's kind of like we try and fill it with all those external circumstances about life. And we think if when only, and there's always a next thing. When I get the next job, it's kind of like it lasts for about 5 minutes and I've got the job there, and then it's the next relationship or the weight loss or this and that, and I'm getting there now. You know, I've had the conversation. I'm getting there. I'm really think that I am heading in this right direction. You know, it's kind of like
there's just that one duck up there, and once I knock that one in, they'll all be in line, and then I'll be there.
Yeah. And all that, I mean, if you think about all that, it's kind of like the I'm getting there and the things and stuff like that suggest that there's a destination to life, you know, that there's somewhere to get to. And it's kind of like when I'm of the misunderstanding that there's a destination, that there's somewhere to get to, you know, it always looks like I'm waiting for something to happen. Like, yeah, life's all right, but when I get this, when I get that, you know, and there's always a sense of dissatisfaction. There's always a sense of lack. There's always a sense of something missing. And it can come in varying degrees. You know, some days I'll be semi-okay or something, but when I get this, then I'll be better. You know, it's kind of like, or some days I'll be like, oh God, life's terrible. This has happened and that's happened. You know, it's kind of like there's varying degrees of that. But it really looks to most people like that life is a journey, you know, of getting the external things set up right, and when they get there they'll experience happiness. And that is the fundamental misunderstanding in all of this. You know, that's like from the ground upwards where it all kind of, you know, looks this way, you know, that life is a you know, what we'd call an outside in journey versus an inside out journey, you know. And it's kind of like, and in my experience, you know, there was never, no matter what I did, no matter where I got to, no matter how much money I got, you know, no matter what job I got, no matter how much weight I lost, what relationship, you know, how well my eating was, how much I didn't use drugs, how long I hadn't used drugs for, no matter what, you know, I put in there, it never did anything for that sense of like, for that sense of, there was always a next goal, a next place to get to, you know.
Yeah, you reminded me of that song out of The Greatest Showman. You know when she goes, never enough.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
know that song? Like, it's
that
just
song.
brilliant. It's such a cool song. So all the bright lights, all the people, it was never enough.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's so true. There's like the human condition, it feels like, is one of never enough and looking outside of ourselves for how to feel that. The closest, the image that comes to mind as you're describing that would describe my experience of that, I guess, and like where I see it, how I describe it works differently is that, like, if you imagine like a beach, and you're on the beach on the wet bit, you know, the damp bit of the beach, and so you're digging a hole. There's a hole there, and you're digging the hole, and then you're trying to put more sand in because you think if you could get the right sand castles, you know, then you'll be happy, and you're trying to put stuff in to fill the hole and fill the hole and fill the hole and fill the hole of this hole on the beach. And there's a hole there, so you've got to keep filling it up with bits of sand from the outside, right? Because it feels weird that there's a hole there, so you need to fill it up to. And if you could just get the right bits of sand and the right amount of sand and the right bits of stones and all the rest of it, then it would all look perfect, and then we could stop.
Yeah.
And what I saw is that when I bumped into this conversation and I explored what there was on offer here, and I started to see more about our true nature and our innate well-being and all that stuff that we will talk about, it was like, as holes on the beach do, it filled up with water itself to the perfect level, and my shovel wasn't required. And it was like this, those intangible dimensions of like love and peace and joy and contentment were just naturally there and kind of filled up from the underneath, despite all my efforts with the shovel on the top like this, right? Which is I've been doing for years and years and years, and wondering why I was so tired and burnt out and exhausted and could never quite get enough. And like when I realized, the first thing I saw about this understanding was that, oh, it doesn't work outside. It doesn't matter how much stuff you get, it's not going to make any difference. And that was my introduction to the principles. It was like hitting my 7-figure business target and there being nothing there when I got there. It was like I have dug so hard for years and years and years and years, and here I am, here's the castle, ta-da! And then it was just like gone, and there was nothing there, and it was like, what was the point? What do I do next? Like, what is going to fill this hole? And so that was my wake up call. The first thing I saw was that it doesn't matter what you create in the outside world, there's always going to be a hole there. And so the first thing for me was I stopped looking outside of myself as much to try and fill that hole. And when I stopped doing that, because everything got a bit quieter, I became aware of the fact that this hole was constantly trying to fill up from the underneath anyway. But for all my best efforts of mucking it up, the hole had always been and would always be filling up from the bottom upwards effortlessly with water. So no hole remained. And that's as a result of this understanding, it doesn't feel like there's a gaping hole there anymore. Like, obviously I forget, right? And then I get busy with my shovel and I start filling it with Facebook flicks or glasses of wine or working too hard or whatever. But every time I wake up to the fact that that's what I'm doing, it's like the hole fills back up again. And it's the most natural thing in the world. It's unstoppable, that filling back up with everything you think you're going to get by going out into the outside world. And like, that's the direction. Like, I want to get more curious about that direction. Like, what is it that's filling up, and how is it doing that without any effort from me? And the more I feel filled up by that, the less inclination there is to go work hard or try and make more money or go exercising or, you know, any of the behaviors that we might do. There's no need for it anymore because there's no hole.
Yeah, it's such a great place to look for people. And it's I think firstly, it's like, it's such a relief for people to know that that's how it works. You know, it's kind of like when it just pointing to that, you know, that it's kind of like, oh, you know, you mean I'm not broken? You know, it's kind of like there's not something wrong with me. And it's kind of like, oh, you know, I've spent a lifetime thinking I was, you know, and it's kind of like, and you know, having someone else that saw in me something that I couldn't see in myself, you know, was one of the magical things, you know, that I still reflect back on, you know, when I just couldn't see. And I really thought I was broken, but I had someone else that saw that's how it works. And they just knew that was how it worked, you know, and
Mm.
in me, it was kind of like made such a difference to my own reflections of myself, my own feelings of brokenness, you know. And you know, like looking at that, kind of like reflecting more on what you was talking about, you know, it's kind of like that is, you know, we're all born with that perfect mental health, you know. And if you think about it, when a baby is born, they don't know separation, they don't know, like you and me, mine and yours, you know, they have no idea of who they are, who they're going to be. They're given a name, you know, and they start to learn about yours and mine and boundaries and so on, and life in that way. And it's like that's kind of how societal conditioning sort of installs all that idea of separation, takes us away from that stuff that you're talking about. So what we're talking about here is kind of like undoing, you know, is an undoing of all that, you know, that learned understanding that we innocently, you know, have picked up along the way. And you know, that's kind of why it's difficult, because we've kind of learned it not knowingly. You know, we haven't consciously gone, I want to learn how to be separate, I want to learn how to have an idea of myself and realize that, you know, this image that I describe as me is not really me, you know, that I am something beyond. We haven't gone out and gone, that's how I want to learn to be in the world. We've just unconsciously learned, you know, like, I've been conditioned into believing the separation of life and believing that we are this idea, you know, that when you say to me, who are you? And I say, well, I'm Jason. Well, I'm my age, I'm my parental role, I'm my relationship status. You know, and we list out all these things that, you know, perpetuate the idea of separation, you know, like between us. But like who we are is way beyond that, and that's what you're talking about. That's what you're, where, you know, as we are born, you know, perfect, innately healthy, where everything's okay, everything has always been okay, you know. And it's kind of like we've just masked it up and covered it up with all these ideas that we've learned.
Yeah, and then got so busy trying to. It's like when you're saying that, it's like when we're born, we are just this hole in the sand, but full of water already. Right? That's the starting point. And then we start, as we get conditioned into seeing that there are other castles and other holes and other things. Well, we should, and then we start looking outside of ourselves at how the beach is arranged, and then get our spade and try and recreate what we can see in other people's lives and what we can see over there. And I think we have to get busy in order to find that feeling of love and connection, which is what we're all looking for. It's the feeling, you know, it's our true essence that we're born into, that feeling, and from that feeling into that feeling, and then from there on, the rest of our life is about trying to find our way back home. And one of the ways, like, and it gets so painful when we keep looking outside of ourselves, because we're looking in the wrong place, that our addictions, I guess, are our innocent attempts to get back home, to find, like, alcohol is there to numb the noisy mind so that you can be quiet and find your way back home. Your smoking of the cigarette is to quiet the voice that's going, just need one more, just need one more, just need one more. And you have the cigarette and it quiets the mind. It's just our innocent attempts to find our way back home. Yeah. But I guess the difference is when we see that we're already home, we never went anywhere, and all of those efforts were futile because they were unnecessary, unrequired, and in fact, we're just getting in the way of our noticing that we were already home. And it doesn't make sense to keep doing them. As in, it doesn't make sense to keep working so hard to try and get the money so that we can be okay. Getting the right relationship, getting the right body, so then we can relax and then we can be okay.
Yeah.
those attempts to get so busy that our addictions are then the relief from.
I often say addiction is the path to enlightenment. You know, it's kind of like, and people just don't see how that works, but that's kind of what you've just been explaining, you know, that it's kind of like, you know, it's just a love letter, as Bill Pettit would call it, you know, like from the soul. It's kind of like saying that, you know, home is there, you know, that's what it's pointing to. And that all the actions are really is to, you know, is to point us home, like you said, or to end the seeking, you know. I mean, like all we really want to do is stop the feeling of longing or stop the feeling of seeking, but it's misunderstood because the, you know, Rupert Spira talked about it as the intuition of knowing where home is. You know, it's kind of like that longing is like our intuition of knowing, you know, where home is, and that's why we keep what we keep longing for. But we mistakenly like use substances or processes or whatever it is, you know, like just to get rid of the feeling, stop that feeling, don't like it, it's uncomfortable, don't want to long, don't want to seek, don't want to be looking for things, you know. It's kind of like, but it's just a misunderstanding of what it is, you know, because we're all just longing to return home. And you said it well, you know, like that everyone wants the same thing. They want peace of mind and happiness, you know, and they're just kind of learned misunderstood ways of searching for it, you know.
Well, it's because if you think it comes from above the sand, the level of the sand, then that's where you're going to look. But I had no, I was running around in my life like thinking that the surface above what went on above the sand is the only game there was to play.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to realize is that no, there's something, I don't even know how it works, but there's something, I don't need to know how it works even, but I can witness the fact that when I stop for a minute, there's something under the earth that just naturally fills me out with water, fills the hole up with water. And I never knew that before. Like I'd never thought about what went on under the sand. Mm. And that, to me, that's the invitation in this conversation, is to, well, what if we got more curious about what's under the sand than on top of it? Yeah. Like, do you know that everything you're looking for is underneath the sand? It's all underneath the sand. And if you even get the slightest inkling of that, you stop paying so much attention to everything that's going on above the sand, and you start looking there instead.
Yeah.
You stop looking at symptoms and behaviors and things and stuff and actions and other people and how you're doing today. And you start looking at, how does it work? How does it work? What is that? What is it under the sand?
Yeah, and at that place, addiction no longer makes sense. You know, that is, it's like, it's very different to stopping, you know, like I'm stopping today, you know, it's kind of like, I must stop today. I need to stop. I have to stop. You get to that point where, you know, what I've seen happen with people is, oh, I just kind of stopped doing that because it didn't make sense anymore. You know, it was kind of like, because they're not creating, you know, their own struggle anymore, and they're not trying to escape from life as it is, because they're seeing it more clearly. You know, they're seeing the truth of who they are more. They're feeling present in the moment with people more, and they're experiencing more of that innate happiness, that contentment, that joy that's inside of them when they're present in the moment. And that's the thing that they were always searching for. Now, it's a completely different experience where addiction no longer makes sense. You know, it's kind of like, oh, well, actually my life's full of joy and happiness and contentment now, and I've got all the things that I thought, you know, I don't really seem to want them anymore, and everything I've got already feels enough. I feel full, you know, I feel full of life. It's like, then why on earth would I want to go and medicate my experience? It just didn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of my addicted to continual what if thinking, for example, right, I mean, I spent 20 years trying to stop that thinking, right, through CBT and tapping and everything, right, to try and quiet that mind down and stop that particular train of thought from happening, scary what if thinking, kind of future proof myself. And as I was in this conversation, I noticed that it vanished on its own, that behavior of pursuing that train of thought over and over and over and over again. Like it disappeared itself. Like, I didn't make it disappear. I didn't consciously decide to stop thinking that thought. I didn't tell myself it's just a thought and then that magically made it go away, right? It fell off my radar.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that. But there's something about, in that example, like when we see that we're already safe, when we see that we're wise, we're already wise, then the need to kind of future-proof myself was not necessary anymore, so fell away. Now that's the intellectual way I would describe it. All I can say to you is I didn't even notice. I woke up one day, it was gone, and I didn't know where it had gone. I just couldn't find it anymore. And that I know happened with my smoking behavior, right? Like years and years and years ago, I woke up one day and it was no longer there. Didn't want to smoke anymore. Yeah. And it's not even that it doesn't make sense to it's not that it doesn't make sense to our intellectual minds. Like, oh, I'm going to have a drink. No, I don't need to anymore because that doesn't make sense. It's not, so therefore I won't, and put the glass down. It's like it just doesn't show up on the radar anymore. It just falls, it dissolves itself away.
The desire disappears. You know, it's kind of like there's no desire for it anymore. You know, there's no reaching for it. There's no, because like to me, you know, become more, the part about being more present in your life, that when you're more present in your life and less time in your, you know, let's call it movie of your life, you know, in your head, you know, or your made-up world, or however you want to see it, you know, all your problems, all those gaps, you know, and the things that we talked about. When you're less in that and you're more kind of here in the conversation with someone or whatever it is you're doing in the moment, like there's nothing to, you know, it's just becomes a more enjoyable experience regardless of what's going on. And from there, there's less desire to fix anything, to make it better, to change anything, you know, to put something in your body or escape, you know, in any way. So it just becomes like that. Life becomes a more, you know, from that place, life becomes more enjoyable, more creative, you know, in all sorts of ways. And like you said, it just no longer seems appealing, not like a conscious intellectual choice, but really because, you know, the experience of life is completely different.
Well, the games we play on the surface of the sand change, right? So it's like, instead of the need to accumulate and get and accomplish and do, be and have more, it changes into just creating beautiful sandcastles and playing with really cool people that show up and being like, it's not like you just sit in your pool of water in the sand, in the hole in the sand, right? And just zen out. It's like, no, the game changes on the surface. Like, it becomes fun and creative and full of life and none of the neediness, and not driven by the lack, but just because you can, rather than because you need to. And there's so much freedom in that game.
Yeah. And maybe like next time we can talk about, you know, how do we create from that place? You know, how does our vibrational creation with the world, you know, change when we start to see it that way, and then, you know, look, and life starts to look different,